Yes.
Cool. Okay. And I have a little bit of delay because even though my job is in Northwestern in Chicago, my body is in the Black Hills of South Dakota, and which is where, we've been, where my wife's position has been, and this is where our primary home has been until the COVID. I went back and forth every other week between Chicago and here. So I was used to working virtually half the time anyway. And so all of a sudden with the pandemic, I've been here, for the last 15 months, hardly even getting anywhere near Chicago. But it means we're far enough out, we don't have cable. So all of our internet is actually running off of various cell phone accounts through Verizon. So my bandwidth right now is not real super. So there will be some delays. Yeah, but so far it's been behaving today. So we'll go from there. So again, whatever you think you're planning is going to, happen next week, forget it. So my motto now is, long-term planning is next week. After that, who knows? We'll do it as we come again. So I think what I kind of introduced it is, this idea of a key element you're going to be hearing through what I've developed over the years is this idea of writing for what reviewers expect to see. And it sounds like it's a very narrowing, but hey, it's life is. This is how we're all conditioned to be expecting, seeing things certain ways. So the idea here is helping people get started, almost decoding and understanding what those patterns are. And so I'll talk to you as we go through them. Again, just a brief, as was mentioned, I've got a long checkered past. I get bored easily, and so, but the flip side, I had unbelievable opportunity to experience a whole lot of different things. And so literally, I have gone from being, boring, ordinary lipid biochemist into neurobiologist, into really evolving into looking at developing scientists as a science. And literally evolved into social scientist over the years. So, I'm probably one of very few people who've been NIH funded to do biophysics and social sciences, across a short lifespan. But it means that, I've been having an unbelievable opportunity to kind of experience different kinds of research, talking about different kind of research, analyzing and understanding research, which is very unusual. So right off the bat, I'm really weird and odd, and so the things I've developed to become because of that. But literally at Northwestern, my job is to work with individuals like you, both from the standpoint, and actually I don't do a lot of seminars, it's really in the trenches writing, which is what you'll see as we'll get to that in a couple of minutes. So that's where I'm coming from. How did this come to be? It actually began around, I've been working with this for over 20 years now, developing this approach, and actually began at the Mayo Clinic when I was there, when they were developing new Masters of Science in Clinical Investigations, back where NIH decided, wait a minute, clinician investigators are a dying breed. They're going to be dinosaurs. They're disappearing from the earth. So we better do something. And they came up with this idea, encouraging medical centers around the country to develop these, programs for clinicians coming to research later in life. So they're not coming in at the same immersion. And during that, because it was coming out of the medical model, it came out, well, can you teach grant writing, or is it all about mentors? And I literally started out at that time, no, you can't teach. It comes from the, school of hard knocks and everything, but eventually became to realize I was totally wrong. And actually, it's actually better to think about it as a starting point as really a complex skill to be taught and learned. And moving it from hoping mentors know how to do it to you can't rely on them, and they even now they don't have time. So this whole approach kind of evolved organically from being proven wrong to begin with in terms of how you can go about this. And it completely forced me to rethink it. And actually the first guinea pigs that I really developed this around were actually the post-bac group that I had developed at the Mayo Clinic. And these were individuals largely from underrepresented groups who were taking a year or two after college to get kind of decide, do they want to do a PhD, or getting the kind of experience become a PhD. So they're my guinea pigs of developing this method. It turned out it was extraordinarily effective for helping them to understand research process and clarify their ideas of research. And so it's evolved, obviously studies since then. And then in 2000 came to at Northwestern, where they were looking for someone to kind of help both with diversity efforts and faculty development. And they said, well, could you do something? I said, well, maybe, I have no idea what. So I've had this unbelievable experience throughout my career of trying to create something where people had no idea, what to be. And when I went to Mayo, it was like, well, we want diversity, we want greater, structure around our graduate programs. Can you do something? I said, well, probably. I don't know what, but let's see what we can come up with. So a lot of these have grown out of experimentation and actually have applied it in other settings as well. So to think about it, why is grant writing so hard to master? Let's step back. First, think about all you have to master of the science of becoming a scientist at the different stages of development that you all have been. But proposal writing is a very different, complex integration of existing knowledge, research question and design, and an extraordinarily unique form of writing. So the fact that this is complicated and difficult absolutely makes sense, and it's not something that comes automatically just from being a good scientist, even coming from just being able to write good papers. Writing papers are about the past. Writing proposals is about a future, but building on the past. And so it's actually a really complex skill scientists have to develop. But it's almost never been taught as a concrete skill, a workshop. So literally at Mayo, I used to lead grant writing workshops for 1,000 people across the entire Mayo system, spend a day at it. People say, great, this has been wonderful, but now I know what I don't know how to do. Now, how do I actually do it? And I began to realize that's the limitation of something like this is you can only get so far, but can you go into more, design and then ultimately into the group psych ideal? Because informal mentoring is incredibly idiosyncratic. A systems engineer would look at mentoring as a talent development system and describe it as a system highly likely to fail, with a high probability of failure because of the idiosyncratic nature of it and the unpredictability of it. And quite honestly, in some versions where some scientists say, well, in order to belong, you actually have to demonstrate you can do it without my help, which it may be great at a species level, survival of the fittest, but it's really lousy from a talent development, a skill development. So we've moved away from that. But I think you have to start from understanding that research, writing, and review are socially constructed. We tend to think about science, oh, it's just all this, it's all objective data. The data may be objective, but the world ain't in terms of this whole process, particularly writing and communicating. So what it means like that, it to become skilled, and it helps to understand the norms and expectations of any social system. And people who become successful have somehow figured it out. Either they've had guidance or they're just really good at figuring it out, but you have to figure it out if you're going to be successful. But, isn't necessarily something that, and get into, what would be referred to as cultural capital in the sociology field and other elements as well. But you start by learning the norms of science and doing research, which you've all done, and then you think of the grant writing as the next step. And again, there's no way you inherently can know how to do this, but being that it's socially constructed means it's subject to the well-established social science theories, models, and constructs. And that's where, I began the journey to the dark side into the whole social science world in terms of understanding how this all works. But when you get to that, the one kind of core construct I like to introduce people to is something called communities of practice. And communities of practice actually comes out of the work of Lave and Wenger, who studied how work groups, this comes out of the work setting, how do work groups actually manage? How do they actually function? And they function through what they called a community of practice. And they function around a common shared interest, common domain. They have common ways of defining competence. And the competence is defined by the group. And the competence is in all ways. It just isn't knowledge. It's literally how you walk and talk and present yourself. And you learn this through interaction with each other. So these are how groups develop and establish these practices. And these shared practices are what actually are passed on as way. And to become a member of a group, you have to be seen by the group as being legitimate by having enough of these demonstrations of these shared approaches and practices. Again, how you share that, so you can end up coming into a group and all of a sudden, well, I'm here in this group, but I really kind of don't feel like I belong because I don't know how the group functions. So you can become marginalized. You may be in the group, but you're really not. You're on the margins. And so you don't actually are engaged fully into this whole engagement. And those practices are, they're absolutely reflective of power structures and, and wild social, biases and all these things come into play in these groups. But they come, you can think of these in work group, but they really apply if you're thinking about science. Think about scientists, and you can think of almost different layered interacting sizes of communities of practice. So for example, biomedical science as a whole, NIH as a whole is this community of practice, but then it goes all the way right down to each research group functions as its own micro community of practice. And you can think about anytime you've moved into a new research group and you look around, you have no idea how this place operates, especially if you're changing fields. You can imagine me for becoming a neurobiologist, all of a sudden showing up and trying to understand the world of social sciences. Words mean totally different things. In my world, theory is something you don't believe until you got all the data to show it works. In the social sciences, no, theory is something you build on, everyone builds on it. You may never actually, demonstrate it. It's like, well, how can those two things? So you're moving into different fields, you have different social construct. So there's a lot of challenges for newcomers, in terms of understanding these. It's learning the process. You've got all kinds of unconscious biases and what have you can come to play. But there are ways of lessening that marginalization and understanding what is going on. The reason I introduce this is because when you're writing an NIH-style proposal, you're making a bid for recognition as a legitimate member of a unique community of practice called NIH-funded investigators. NIH-funded investigators are an extraordinarily well-defined community of practice. It may differ a little bit from field, but it has this incredible domains of competence, and of those domains of competence, what you have to be able to demonstrate in the writing when a reviewer opens your application and start to review it, and someone else reads it and gives you feedback. So that's where it comes from. Let me take a drink of water. Any questions about laying this kind of a social construct foundation, where I'm coming from? Okay, so the reason I go through that is because it lays the rationale for I can come across as very dogmatic as their one way of writing. And there is and there isn't, talk to where it is, but when you're getting started, the more you want to write is you want to act, sound, and feel like the reviewers who are looking at your proposal. After you've gotten your 10th R01, you can probably write any way you want, and no one's going to care because you got such a reputation. When you're starting out, you don't have that. You don't have that cachet. 10 R01s from now, hey, write whatever you want. They're not even reading, they're just sending you the money half the time, kind of a thing. Not when you start out. And again, when I think about even writing proposals that, some of this, sometimes people, oh, I want to keep doing the science. No, writing research into proposal is not time away from, it's actually integral to doing good science. It's how you move from doing experiments to doing research. It's actually writing it, a systematic process. Complex skill that because it's so complex, it deserves the highest level of complex teaching and learning. However, high quality writing will very seldom cover up poorly developed or inadequately science. At the end of the day, it is the science that gets funded. Now, you may argue good science in the eye of the beholder, absolutely welcome to peer review, but at least, the writing and the science have to go hand in hand. The other thing is that feedback in writing opens a window to the science. So when I'm working with people on proposals, we talk about the writing, we end up in the science. When we're writing in a group, we talk about the writing, we end up in the science, because now we can see the science and we can talk about it. Whereas when you're just talking with someone, it does not carry the same weight as the visual precision of the language on the paper. So as you're looking for feedback, don't be surprised if feedback gives you change to your science. And you're involved with health disparities research, which is a real core interest of a lot of people. It's especially complicated and difficult. And NIH is not particularly good at supporting health disparities or large population other than we're on some very specific domains. So that's another element of all of this. So I know you're all writing, so this may be, too late to, but when you think about, and I've added this in terms of, literally, when do you start writing words on a page? And I would argue that you start back at, well, what is your research questions? And again, write them down. What are your hypotheses? Write them down. What impact will answering your questions have on the field? That's a question that many times people ask too late. Because they may get a long ways down the field, a long ways down the line with something, gee, I'd like to know the answer to this. And that, unfortunately, is not the right question. The answer is, does the field need to know the answer to this? And if you're thinking about that right from the beginning, it can be extremely valuable in helping shape what you decide to go after and the feedback you get. But again, having these things now opens your conversation, but it's extraordinarily fascinating how having this on a piece of paper and email is totally different than just say, let me talk to you about my ideas. So getting them on paper is the next step. Then you begin to outline your approach to see if it's achievable. Get a good start of these, you mire down in details, and then you tend to work on the specific aims page, which is your miniature proposal. A specific aims page is a miniaturized proposal that a reviewer is going to form an opinion in 5 minutes if this is something they think is interesting and I get funded. And I hate to say it, but that's exactly what you've got, about 5 to 10 minutes to capture the interest of the reviewer. And so when we work on aims page in our writing groups, we may spend 2 months on an aims page. We may spend 2 months on an aim page, go back to the drawing board, come back in 6 months and start over again, because that is the proposal, and that everything just develops from that as well. But again, this feedback in the early writing processes we found are absolutely incredibly valuable, as you go. And we'll talk about different ways of getting feedback. Okay. What do you have to achieve in a proposal? And we'll focus on a K proposal. And think of it as not what do I have to write, it's what do I have to achieve? That's the core question. You have to demonstrate your research is really important, feasible, logical next step. You have to show that you really understand the field. You have to show, and the language and the choice of what you write about demonstrates that. Have to show you're actually working in the field. Interesting, in the last few months, I've actually discovered that working with people, many times writing a K even, we're reading the aims page, and I'm realizing they're not in this page. It's written as if, well, this is a nice piece of interesting research, blah, blah, blah. It's come across as a theoretical, as opposed, well, where are you in this page? A writer has to be in the aims page, showing you're working in the field. And again, in a compact and then expanded way, you have to show your research accomplishments are excellent and appropriate. It'll be different for someone who is, writing for a K, who they're a clinician, they've only done a couple of years of research, they're at a starting point, very different from an MD PhD who's now writing for a K award. But typically people will get evaluated based on where they are and their projections. And we'll see about that, the data that you'll talk about that more. You have to demonstrate a successful pathway to an independent R award. You'll hear me say this probably several times today. A K is nothing more than a pathway to an R01. A K is a pathway to what you are after the K. The K is not an end, it's a means to an end. And a reviewer has to see that pathway, even if it's not the actual, here's the title of the R01 I'm going to write. It's got to be there. Absolutely crystal clear writing style. We'll talk more about that. And again, all of these, okay, if these are all here, that's the evidence. Hey, you kind of look like one of us. You look like how I might have been writing. This is how, and with a K award, it's doubly or triply important. And the K award is actually an extraordinarily unforgiving award. Any one of the elements that doesn't sing, you get killed at least twice. Okay, so if your research design is not very strong, you get criticized, your mentors get criticized for why haven't you stepped in. If your career development plan is not very strong, you have problems, your mentors have problems. So almost any concern on a K award is at least a double whammy of you and your mentors, your institution. So it really is a very unforgiving award from that perspective, any one of the criteria. Again, this is what reviewers are expecting to see. But again, all of this starts from, understanding reviewers. And, I imagine many of you are pretty familiar with the NIH review process. We don't have time to walk through that in depth, but you basically are writing for what they expect to see and what they want to see. So the writing early on feels very formulaic. The formula that I will expose you to, it's a formula. It's a formula to get started, but it's a formula that people recognize even though they don't know it's there. And that's the fascinating thing of this, the social conditioning that takes place, because you have to turn the reviewer into your advocate. You have to turn them into, say for a K award, K panel, whatever is going on, they know that no more than 15% of the people are going to get funded. So if I've got 10 if I've got 10 reviews, I know that, statistically no more than 1 or 2 of those are likely to be in that fundable category. My job is find those 1 or 2 and I'm going to advocate for them. The others, I'm going to find a group that, hey, you're close, but here you need to fix it. The other, I guess I have to keep reading to be able to write a review on what I don't like this. And so your whole style is turning that into the review process. But the challenge here, it gets worse because you are writing for different kinds of reviewers, and recognize that right from the beginning. You're writing for hopefully 1 or 2 experts in the field, because those are really peer reviewers of your science. You have to write to them as another expert in the field. But then you're going to have 1 or 2 reviewers who are going to be, I call them a sophisticated non-expert. They're kind of in your field, but not exactly in your niche in the field. So they have to understand it. And then you have to actually be writing for someone who could actually be, not directly in the field, particularly for a K panel. You're looking at a K panel, yes, it's, IC specific, it's field specific, but it's a broad range, of say neuroscience, broad range of neurobiology, broad range of this. So you have to be speaking to people at different levels of expertise. So that's why you'll see, we always talk about writing in funnels. You're always writing, so at the top you've got everybody. By the time you're down at the point of the funnel, you've kept everybody along, but now only the real expert is down there. But the other person who isn't the expert knows that's okay, because I've got the big picture, and Fred's going to take about the details of the electrophysiology that I really don't understand depth of. So you're writing, so you keep everybody with you as far as you can. And if you're doing high level biostatistics, you could have someone here, they're just looking at the statistics. And so you have to be writing, so you're anticipating who are your likely reviewers. And that's one of the things we always talk about for any particular, our panel, who are going to be the reviewers? What are the likely panel you're going to get to? So you're writing for reviewers. If all of a sudden you turn around and write to a foundation, everything goes out the window. You may have a totally different style of reviewers, and you have to begin as much as you can to know who they're going to be. You're writing for reviewers. And here's some kind of interesting links to some videos if you're not too familiar with how the peer review process takes place, especially the study section. Let me stop there. Another quick breath. Anything about writing for reviewers? Okay.
Would you mind going back to that last slide just for a moment?
Sure can. That one or this one?
The one right with the links. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yep. And I'll send these out. You'll all have these slides. I can't give my stuff away fast enough, so you're all welcome to it. And but it's never ready more than a few hours before I do it, so I can't send out ahead of time. Well, this one I finished yesterday, I revised it yesterday, so that's actually way ahead of the game. Okay. Alrighty. But then you're also keep in mind that you're writing for review criteria, because reviewers are scoring things based on this overall impact, but the impact is based on component scores. So for an R type review, these are the 5 core review criteria, and reviewers are giving you strengths and weaknesses for every criteria, and the 3 primaries, a score from 1 to 9. And for each of those, and they will see about, well, what do the factors really mean? But it's incredibly important to realize that not all of these criteria are weighted necessarily the same, because the overall impact score is not a mathematical average of the 5 component scores. And so each of them will take on higher relevance in the scoring. So for an R type award, all the data show that the 2 best predictors of the overall impact are significance and approach. Unless the work is important, you can have everything else in the world be great, but we're not going to give you the money. Unless you're doing it the right way, it can be the most important thing in the world, but we're not going to give you the money. And so the others fit in different ways. So for example, if it's a highly innovative proposal, that can drive the score if it's highly innovative. Innovation can always also drive the score the wrong direction. If, well, this is kind of interesting, but it's not innovative, it's, we've got 6 studies of this, another 7th one using the same methods is not going to move the field. So innovation is more of a pushing things one direction the other. Environment investigators also play a different role. Ironically, there appears to be, to a certain extent, an inverse relationship between investigator scores and overall impact scores. And the logic of that is after we beat you up on significance, after we beat you up in approach, we're going to tell you, yeah, but you're overall pretty good guys, kind of a thing. So it's a funny mentality, a funny culture that's at play. So you have to take, again, significance and approach. If those 2 aren't there for our proposal, it's never going to, it's really, but we'll talk about for the K, they're very different in a minute. And I have these in the slides. I'm not going to talk through them, but there are words behind each of these review criteria. So significance, these are NIH words, these are not my words. So NIH word, does the project address the important problem or a critical barrier to progress in the field? So reviewers are conditioned to, this is what you need to comment on. Is it going to make progress in the field, critical barrier? So when these were revised 8 years ago, again, all of a sudden the word barrier actually showed up in frequency never been seen before. So people literally are writing explicitly to what's going on, or what the criteria are. Again, have these here, I won't go through them, but it actually gives words behind what the social conditioning of reviewers are that they're supposed to be commenting on: innovation, approach, environment. Okay, here are the review criteria for the K award. Doesn't even look anything like an R award. And that's one of the reasons that if you've written R awards, when you shift to writing a K, you really have to start from scratch. Likewise, I work with a lot of people with a K to R transition, and also it's a big lift to rethinking how, because the criteria have totally changed. And as I mentioned, all of these criteria for a K tend to take kind of equal balance, and everything, all something can do is, drag you down. So it's almost like they all have to be there to be able to say, okay, here's the full package. Any deficit in the package can have a pretty, deleterious effect on the review. So that's why I want to spend probably most of the time, next few minutes, walking through what does that really mean? And what are you trying, again, back to you're trying to accomplish? What's the story? We always talk about you're writing a storyline, you're writing a line of thinking, a line of reasoning, a line of logic. And what is that line that you're having to create? Again, here are the written criteria for a K award, the scored criteria for candidate. A K award is about you. And this is another thing I've been having a hard time. I encourage everyone I'm writing in a K award. In a K award, the aims page, the word is I, it's not we. If for my part, we never shows up in a K award aims page other than describing what might have happened in the past. K moving forward is all about I, it's all about what you're going to be doing. Does the candidate have the potential to develop as an independent and productive researcher? You can read through, I'm not going to read them all, but the core element is independent, productive investigator. How do you demonstrate independence? Think about it. How do you demonstrate that you're going to be someone who will become independent, and where do you write about it? Turns out that this really shows up in your biosketch and the prior research section of the K award. And here's where the biosketch and the prior research can really fight each other and feel like they're redundant in a K award. I typically look as the biosketch is a synopsis of where you've gotten to. Here's the core nuggets. It now really expands about research in the prior research.
I think we have a little bit of a pause here as he's stuck. It looks like he might be coming back in. So let's just hold on for a couple minutes, see if we get him back. Okay, sorry about that. We'll just wait for a little bit, see if we can reconnect.
Yeah, this is, actually I was impressed at how well things were going on Verizon cell data in the Black Hills, but so he will hopefully be back on soon. So, does anybody have any questions or thoughts or comments people want to share while we're waiting for Dr. McGee to join us again?
I liked it so far. It's very, it's a mindset. I like the idea of the mindset. And my question, what do you think about the transition to a mindset of an RO1? What's your thought from your personal experience? Because you did the K and you did the RO1.
No, I completely agree with Rick. It is a very different mindset. As I know some of you have heard me say already, the outcome of a successful K award is a successful independent investigator that is capable of getting an RO1 award, right? So all of those components are really important, including the significance and the approach, because again, they reflect on you and your mentor in terms of your ability to know what is important in the field, to put it in context, to show that it's important in the field, and that you with the help of your mentor are able to develop a scientific approach that will actually appropriately address that question. And anything that is not, anything positive in that reflects well on you and on your mentor, and any flaws in that, either a lack of being able to demonstrate why your work will address an important aspect of the field, or, get over a barrier or fill a gap, or in the approach that you take in doing that, again, reflects badly, as Rick said, on both you and your mentor. So all of those things are interwoven, but you also, again, need to demonstrate beyond that, that you have a good career development plan, that you have a good mentorship plan, that your institution, Rick hasn't gotten to this yet, but institutional support is really important. Because all of those things are essential for the outcome of this, which is obtaining, being a successful independent investigator that can obtain an RO1 award. And so it is a different mindset than an RO1. And as he said, you want to demonstrate, having enough preliminary data to demonstrate your ability to feasibly do the work, and to learn the things that you're going to learn that are new, right? Because part of this is it's a training grant. So if you come in sounding like you're fully ready to apply for an RO1, then your study section may say, why do you need a K award? Particularly for those of you that are applying for the K-12, the K-12 is a pre-KK, right? So it is designed, the K-12 is designed to get people to an independent K, either typically a K-23 or a K-08, occasionally a K-02, but most commonly a K-23 or K-08. And then the K-23 and K-08 is designed to get people to an RO1. So, the amount of preliminary data should be proportional to what your needs are as a trainee. And if you already have a paper in Nature, Science, or Brain that demonstrates that you've already completed your aims, that is not actually going to put you in a good position for a K award, particularly.
Definitely, yes, yeah, definitely.
All right, Rick's back. Let's get the real expert to. I was still in time, Rick, based on what I've heard you say in the past.
Thanks so much. But I think that is an interesting place where sometimes the K-12 and the K-08 or K-23 can bump into each other, because if all of a sudden you accomplish all of your career development aims in the K-12, then sometimes you have to be careful. Okay, well, what's left to do in the K-23? So apologies. I'm back. It's like you always have a plan B. So we got to plan B anyway, without too much. Okay, and so let me see. Okay. All right, we're back. Okay, am I back to where I was? Got it. Okay, I can see that. Okay. Yeah,
Yes.
Amy and everybody.
Yep.
Okay, great. Okay.
Sorry, I had muted
So,
and then I was happily talking to you on mute. So
yeah, no problem. Yeah, and again, so we'll, again, the whole, I've got all these in slides and I can work through them, but the idea here is you actually have to think about this side of independence. So, words that you write that rather than just, well, I write, I'm a first author on these papers, I can see that. What does a first author on that paper mean? What did you actually contribute? What did you actually achieve? So it's a different style of writing than you typically, and for many people, it's hard to write that in that way about themselves. It feels like, ironically, it's, all the research is, it's pretty gender-based. Men don't seem to have a problem writing about how great they are. Women, it's something that is a little harder many times. And that's just the way it is. So actually, it's conditioning. People have been conditioned in different ways. So you have to, but you're writing about yourself in this case as well. You're telling your story, but you're providing data, reviewer data. All think about this. Everything you're doing is you're providing data in this application, data about you, data about the research, data about the past, data about the institution. It really is about data and the story that links the data together. One thing that many times if you run up to bumps or delays, if they're there, they're real. I remember talking to someone who was, had come to the US, was doing research, international scholar. All of a sudden life took him away. He had to go back to his home country to deal with family issues, came back, was getting back engaged again. He felt, well, they'll never believe me. Said, no, the fact isn't you got pulled away. The important part is you're back. I'm back, folks, here I am. It's what you deal with, how you work with the things that come along. Again, these are, you'll have all these, but you really look at the goal. What is the likelihood the plan will contribute substantially to the scientific development of the campus and the lead to scientific independence? You will see independence is probably the most commonly reflected word in here, so you have to think about it. You run into things if you're, working alongside in the research space of a highly sophisticated mentor, that's great. But the reviewer says, okay, how are you going to differentiate yourself from Amy? How are you going to show what you're doing is different from what Amy is doing? And if there's any thought of that, that's where my brain goes. That's great, but it sounds like your research is awful close to what Amy is doing. Are you two going to be competing at the end of the day, or what's going to happen? So it's a metacognitive experience of thinking about a reviewer is thinking. Okay, I know this can seem like, and you literally say, it can appear that the research I'm doing is very closely aligned with my mentor. However, it actually is totally different. Here is what I've done. So you literally are thinking about what a reviewer might be thinking and the concerns they might, be raising along the way. Basically, it's why should we invest in 5 years of your life? That's the question of a KA word, reviewer. And this comes from about you and in the career development, how you be different at the end of the day. The research plan. Again, our question design significant scientific merit, absolutely good. Is the plan relevant to the candidate's research and career objectives? The research typically has to go hand in hand with the career objectives, and it has to go hand in hand with the career development. These two are working synergistically. Again, something that takes real skill in making it clear how they work together, and what it will be after the K. Again, what will be the likely. And that's where you have to think about the research plan. It's not just a research plan for the K. The K is the beginning of a research program. And how will this research lead to your research program, and what does that research program look like? It's like writing an R01 is not to get the R01, it's to get the competing renewal of the R01. And what will that program look like? Which is totally different than if you're writing for NSF or if you're writing for a foundation. They fund a piece of work. And then after that, well, good luck. NIH looks at their expectation is to fund research on an ongoing basis. So again, these are some of the key pieces to it that, it sets the stage. A lot of the key things already mentioned on there. So the mentors, consultants, collaborators, the mentoring cloud. And way I describe it to people, again, these are the elements on there, what NIH says, but basically you have 4 components for anyone who's a mentor or a co-mentor in particular. Who are they? What are they really good at? What are you going to get from them, and how are you going to get them? It's a very actually simple equation that has to be there. So a reader says, okay, I got it. If they read that and they don't see why this person is there, then it's, wait a minute, why is this person here? Or, is there, they're a world's expert. I don't give you any time. So if you're being mentored by a world famous somebody, you have to convince me that that world famous somebody will pay attention to you at all. I'm going to believe they won't until you can give me evidence otherwise. So those are the kind of things that are going through the mind with each of these different roles. And I describe it as, you don't have to have all of them, but, I look at the mentors and co-mentors are really, that's it. You're really learning something from them. A consultant is someone who gives a little bit. And they may be, in aim 1, learning some. A collaborator is literally a collaborator. And again, you may not be in a dependent role with some people. You may be on a peer role, and that's okay to have peers. You're not going to become the world's expert in everything. In fact, it's better if you don't. And so here can be very appropriate to have collaborators even for a K. So again, it's this mentoring cloud. So I'm going to, skip these because I want to make sure I get to the idea of how these are all great and how to actually do. And I've got some slides here. I know it's premature to think about the K to R01 transition, but it actually is somewhat in vain as you think about where it will lead to. You really are thinking about the idea of cognitive control of telling a story, and you're creating the storyline from the past to the future. And again, I've talked about this metacognitive of thinking about what reviewers are thinking about, and like the controversy in the field, you want to be the one to bring it up. You want to be the one to acknowledge it. You acknowledge you know it, and here is how my work will, help to sorting out the controversy, kind of a thing. So, and the idea of, I'll show you some tools in terms of writing creates that storyline in ways that I had never envisioned until I ran into someone who really knows how to write. And then we'll show you these in a minute. But the Ames page is this, like I said, this core element. I could show you my specific Ames page from 1978 or 1979. The structure wouldn't look very much different than the Ames page today. And if you can say that about a piece of writing, that is a cultural anthropologist, that's a culture defining element. Anything that is that consistent. So that's why this Ames page takes on such a role, because it has to achieve all of these things in one simple little page. And the reason once you have that, once you have this, the top half of the Ames page becomes your significance and the innovation. The bottom half of your Ames page becomes your approach. And it follows exactly the, the cognitive patterning, the cognitive expansion. So it's just a repetition. Here's the thumbnail, and here I give you all the details. But your brain already has the architecture in mind. Everything is hanging on that architecture that you've already created in the Ames page. And that's why we push the design of the Ames page so kind of dogmatically. Again, this, the significance is really, I think of it as the importance, but it really comes from what used to be called the background and significance, which really says the background that leads to why it's the significance. So the background lays out the pathway of what is known, such the stage, therefore the next step in the field is this. So this is what significance is laying, is the pathway to why what you're proposing to do is going to be significant in the science. So again, it's a form of writing, and it's, and it's a very carefully constructed, but at the same time, you have to critiquing. So, the NIH is more push now on the rigor of prior research. So if your whole story is based on one clinical, trial with 40 people, you have to acknowledge that the one trial has been done, with limited population. Here's what they found, but the data are strong enough that we feel this is something really to build on. Or there's only been 3 trials, very small numbers, really no one is, believes them, so you're giving, again, judiciously choosing when you describe that. Innovation is novelty. Now remember that innovation is not a scored criteria and a K award. So you're actually in a K award. You don't want to be too innovative because high innovation is high risk. You can't take a lot of risks K award. You got to have something at the end of the day, because it's 5 critical years of your life. If you take on a high risk project and you end up with nothing, you're kind of dead in the water. So they don't expect K research to be highly innovative, but it can't be derivative. It has to be, something enough different. Typically, innovation it's a short section. It's 2 or 3 good places in where the work is innovative that, that can stand out. Then the approach is how you're going to do it. All right, so now, how do you, sounds great, right? How do you do this? Well, I did it by the seat of my pants, and we kind of developed some of these structures until I ran into a guy named Carl Keller, and was actually in the last economic disaster, they had the research supplements, and I put out a call. I wanted to develop some more materials. How do you write these things? And Carl's a writing communications expert, said, communication, writing, I do that. What's a grant? You keep talking about you want to write these grants better. What's a grant? He literally had no idea. He didn't have a science background, never seen an NIH grant in his life. But so Carl said, that's okay. Gave him some that were funded, walked away literally a couple of weeks, came back, said, oh, this will be easy. You guys really write in boring, repetitive ways, don't you? Yeah, I don't know, we just write. No, he said, no, it's okay. What he described and what I'm going to show you is the concept of rhetoric. Rhetoric is a style of writing that every field develops, and many times it develops it without even knowing that it's done it. And so Carl introduced us to something called rhetorical patterns. And so the rhetorical patterns he created in these videos that I'll be pointing you to exist on what's called the CLIMB website, which is a professional development series I've been leading for pre-AP students, but under resources, the link to written communications that takes you to this page. And this page has a series of 15-minute voiceover PowerPoints. It's Carl's voice that Carl has created that completely changed the way we think about writing proposals. The first one, 5 principles of writing readable sentences, absolutely critical information, completely changed the way I write. Creating coherent paragraphs, topic sentences, words, transitions. How many of you ever remember being taught something about a topic back in junior high school? How many think about when you write a proposal, really think about what's my topic sentence and how does the paragraph flow for my topic sentence? So very, very different ways. But the core ones are, if you look at part 1, rhetorical patterns, aims pages, and part 2, specific aims. When you listen to the and view the image, the video for part 1, what you'll be seeing, Carol will walk through real live examples of fun aims pages and deconstruct literally every sentence into a role, a purpose that that sentence is playing in the essential story of a paragraph. And you look at, and he breaks them down into things like a long-term goal, a significant context in the field, complication, then maybe a narrowing complication, things like hypotheses. And then he looked at it and kind of deconstructed what this sentence is doing and kind of got it this way. Now, the last section here on qualification stressed, those 2 examples we have are overblown. So don't look at those and say this is normal. These are overblown. But if you're writing from an institution that reviewers maybe never have heard of, you literally would bring up to the aims page, okay, reviewer, I know what you're thinking. You've never heard of University of X. Okay, I'm going to tell you right here on the aims page why University of X and I can accomplish this. So you leave nothing to chance. But in most of your cases, that's going to be overblown. So Carl does this with 2 different aims pages, breaks it down in units. Guess what? They're all the same. They're arranged differently, different ways of doing it. When you do that, you end up coming up with, okay, here is essentially an outline or an element of the core of the half of the aims. The top half of the aims page can be broken down into these rhetorical elements. And as you walk or if you look at those, the titles on there, you thought, yeah, okay, that would make sense. I usually want to know the big picture. I do want to know what's expected. Oh, okay, you know, I've got to be on the aims page. So what's the real problem? What's the big, if you look at these and think about it, if all of those were high, visible, and clear, I would know what you want to do, why you want to do it. So it breaks it down literally in this case in fairly formulaic way, but you can look at, are all those things in the aims pages that I'm writing in that process. So let me, before I do that, let me take a quick drink of water and stop for a minute. In terms of, this is a lot of information, but it moves it into a pattern of writing that reviewers are used to seeing, even though they probably couldn't tell you that that's what they're seeing. Yep. Any quick reactions to that? A lot
So
to
I
digest.
have
Yeah.
Go
Yeah.
ahead, Bridget.
No, go
Oh
ahead.
yeah, I was just going to say that I have a question about, I guess going back a few slides when you're talking about the biosketch and building on our research background. So what would your advice or strategy be for someone whose research background is maybe in like mostly a slightly different area than what they're writing their proposal on? Kind of, do you not focus on it so much, or sort of talk about your contributions, but knowing that they don't apply directly to the proposal at hand?
Great question. And what you're what you're talking about is the past, is how it's shown how you've developed as a scientist. You know, and I think absolutely be aware that it's totally normal for interest to change. I mean, who would have expected, somebody like me of the extreme, but going from lipid biochemistry to neurobiology, it's what? No, there's a perfectly logical path. I was interested in membrane structure function. Likewise, if you're getting started, every early experience a person has doing research is about what's available to you, what you know. And every time you learn something more, something else will grab you. There's no logic for what grabs people differently, but it's the pathway of developing as a scientist, and now how that's led you to where you are today. And now if you don't have very much experience in where you are today, you then will have to capture, okay, and here's the evidence that I'm beginning to get into this field. So it's the path. I'm now in this field. I may be fairly junior, but I've got highly developed skills as a scientist. The skills as a scientist transcend the field that you're in. The knowledge you apply them to is what you're evolving into. So make sure to keep those two conceptual pieces of it, kind of separate. And that's your storyline. You literally are calling out the storyline is, during this time, I really developed these high level skills, blah, blah, blah. But then at some point, I discovered something new. All of a sudden I realized this is where my interests are. And now I'm shifting into applying those skills into this new area. Does that help a little bit?
Definitely, thanks.
Yeah, and I think sometimes people worry more about that than reviewers do, quite honestly. Because reviewers have all been through shifting times and shifting interests. So they're, again, it's the pathway, the logic for it. All right, the last few minutes
Rick,
I'm going to talk about, yeah.
Let you know, I will be popping off soon, and you had mentioned that people, that we can have access to the slide. So I just wanted to make sure we made it clear to everyone how that would be, how those would be available to them.
And I'll just send them to you, and you can distribute them however you want.
That would be great.
Okay.
That would be great if you can send them in.
Yep.
Okay, thanks so much.
Yep, good to see you. So, please go ahead. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Sure. So my question is, you had kind of started talking about it a little bit, and I just kind of wanted to hear a little bit more about kind of the how to balance the redundancy in your application versus you really want to make sure that the reviewer gets the point versus, kind of overstating a point where they're like, well, you've seen it here and here and here, versus kind of like discussing your biosketch versus the research plan, etc. How do we balance that to make sure that the reviewer sees the point of what we're trying to say without being redundant?
Great question. Yeah, very insightful question. Yeah, and I think it's the on one hand, it's making it a little different. So like in the BioSketch and your the your personal statement, I view it as it is a personal statement. Here's a bit of my storyline, but in a compact way. Here's my my elevator speech when I meet you on the elevator. Hi, my name is so and so. When you get into the contributions of research, they're organized by a contribution of a field, but the logic between them is not there. Now, when you go to your prior research, you're now creating a more of a storyline of the logic of the evolution. And so that level of redundancy it's an expanding and a slightly different version. So readers are used to seeing that. So the level of redundancy is expected and normal in many cases. Now, the other kinds of redundancy are, things like, how do I put it? In an Ames page, for example, reviewers don't want any redundancy. So in an Ames page, you have their undivided attention. They will keep track of what you told them before. You don't need to remind them of it. When you move into you have the significance, you may talk about, give a nod to your preliminary data, even the significance that leads to what you want to do. Now in the approach, here are all the data. So there'd be a limited redundancy, but it's always expanding. It's coming in a slightly different way. So it doesn't feel repetitive. It's there purposely designed to kind of go deeper, tell me more. I've given you a framework, now I'm going to give you the details to hang it on. So that's my general approach, but try to avoid just pure redundancy and repetition as much as you can. That make sense?
Yes, thank you. That was very helpful.
Sure. Okay, and again, apologies for the a bit of the delay in the internet glitch, but the question is, again, this is all about showing you kind of belong. But now, how do you get this this process? It's a teaching learning. What I want to get is feedback. Off that we've shifted to almost all the feedback I give is oral. And particularly when I'm working in groups. And the reason I do that is I will always say more than I will type. Even if I'm really, eager, spend a lot of time typing, my rate of typing, which is pretty fast, is still nothing compared to my way of speaking. And when I'm speaking, I'm giving you what I'm thinking right off the bat, and so one of the reasons, if you think about there, when you get written feedback, it has great strengths. You send an Ames page off to a mentor, they give you some feedback, they may give you some alternative explanations to work from, they may give you details, can be very thoughtful, they'll have time to think about it. So you tend to get very thoughtful, ideally, and they may give you some alternatives. But the problem is many times hard to get detail and focus. You get back, this paragraph is awkward. I don't understand this paragraph. Well, what do you do with I don't understand this paragraph? What do you not understand about it? So it tends to be fairly punctuated and not necessarily a lot of details to work with. Okay, the worst looks fine to me, basically says I didn't have time to read it, and that's what you're getting back. And it's also hard to get people to focus on large pieces of writing. So even if you're getting written feedback, I would recommend, like, give an Ames page, give them a significance section. Once you get up to 12-page proposal, you'll get their same amount of time spread over 12 pages and won't give. So think very carefully about what you give people in writing. But with oral, it really moves into dialogue. Okay, so for example, if you sent me an Ames page, I'd say, okay, Timoteo, let's talk about it. Let's set up a time to talk. And I literally would say, okay, let's put it up on screen. Let me read the first paragraph and tell you what my brain is thinking. So essentially, you're replicating what a reviewer is doing who's never seen your work before, and literally replicating exactly what your words are doing to my brain. And what you're doing to my brain, saying, okay, with my topic sentence here, I thought I was going to hear about this. I just got the middle paragraph, and I don't know how I got here. I've come to the end of the first paragraph. Well, I kind of know the background, but I have no idea where you're going. And literally in 5-minute dialogue, and then Timoteo can come back and say, well, this is what I was trying to achieve. Here is the big picture. Okay, here's my intent. Okay, go type that. Or we can go back and forth, and in real time, there's can be a huge evolution of the writing, and then as you work down it, you can actually get right into the science as well. So that's why oral feedback, if you can practice it, it literally can move things very quickly. So we may spend a half an hour on Ames page and we're done. It may not look anything like we started from in early phases, but we've captured the entire dialogue by recording it, just like we're doing here. Now you can engage in it. You don't have to type everything. Said, oh, geez, that's exactly what I want to say. Can you tell me again? No, I've already lost it. Or, we sometimes say, okay, we've read this page, we really don't know what is it that you want to do. And you say, okay, here is what I want to do. Go type it. Literally, what we find, people can get locked up in trying to get the words perfect and can miss the storyline. And so thinking about supplementing oral feedback, even with your mentors or with colleagues, capturing their thinking, and you can go back and forth and say, well, what if you said it this way? What if you said this way? It can become a very rapid way of getting additional feedback. Like in our case, we tend to do it in writing groups. So I've got this great job. I mean, literally since between March and May, I was working with 40 junior faculty in groups of 3 to 5 people, each group working meeting real time 90 minutes per week. And so we work through Ames page, significance, innovation, K awards, through career development, and a whole. We typically don't get into approach because now you're down the weeds of the science. But usually approach is where you can get the the help from mentors and what have you. It's the other pieces. But think about that even where you are. Do you kind of the ways you have some groups, and for a person to help you, all of a sudden, and I can tell you in a group, 4 brains are always better than 1. It cuts the work I have to do down to a fraction, literally. So it's an efficiency tool on my part. And literally, I purposely don't read them ahead of time because I don't want to forget my first impression. I want to give you my first impression and then engage in the dialogue when things are working or not working. So that's something to think about as you're looking at how do you get feedback, because you cannot write in a vacuum. Nobody can write in a vacuum when you're getting started, especially when you're developing the ideas, especially when you're figuring out, well, what should my career development pieces be? What should they look like? Does this make sense? You want to do those at the early phases, talk them through, get them worked out with drafts, then you can spend the time refining them. But you can't do it by yourself. It just, nobody can. All right, so all these are just more elements that I just gave you. One thing, if you're working with groups or you're working with feedback, be a little careful that whoever is giving you a feedback replicates likely reviewers. So for example, we stratify the group from basic science, clinical, social behavioral. A basic scientist is not writing for a social scientist. So a social scientist can't ask the basic science to write it so they can understand it. So make sure that the feedback you're getting are reasonably replicating the range of reviewers you're likely going to be giving. And if you're giving feedback, give it from the perspective of how close you are to the field, and make sure you situate that in that regard. So I think those were these are just kind of some summary things in terms of the skill. If you don't know how to do it, that's normal. And it's the feedback. It's like, who's ever learned how to play tennis by watching a bunch of videos? No, you practice. You get out there and you hit a bunch of balls, and you got to coach a ball machine. It can go that faster. So it's how do you get feedback, and how do you, but with the, it is fairly formulaic. There is a structure that will really help you when you're getting going. So these are just things you have, take home messages. So again, I say always enjoy the journey on the road to acquiring pathological grant-seeking behavior. That's those of us who stay in this field. That's what you love you love the chase, and it's like when there's money on the table, you can't help yourself. But even there, you begin to strategize. Well, that's not money is efficiently for me to go after. So let me stop there and see if anybody's left. No, pretty much everybody here. So, all right, a lot to throw at you in hours period of time. Happy to throw more at you. What would you like to know about? Yeah, sure. Thanks.
So I just had another quick question. How do you know
Yep.
when it is really actually, I mean, you can write it up and you can think it's great, but how do you know when it's actually making sense and it's ready for, submission or, basically prime time kind of thing?
Yeah, and you only way you can do is through feedback. Quite honestly. Again, but you have to make sure that you encourage and enable people to give you that kind of feedback. And you literally say, I'm just getting started. You hear my ideas. I really need to just talk about them, and you tell me how they're landing, how you view those ideas, how you're thinking about this from the standpoint of the field. And you literally say, because me as a junior person, one of the hardest things to know is, will the field see this as something important to do? So literally telling the person, this is what I want you to be honest and tell me about. Because what you have to guard against the two extremes, the person who doesn't want to hurt your feelings and the person who isn't going to like anything no matter what you give them. You're looking for those people in the middle who are going to say, let's have an honest dialogue. And you can sometimes do it with peers, but generally you need to go up the food chain a little bit. People who have had the experience, who can tell you, and someone say, if you were reading this, if you were a reviewer, would your initial impression be, have I gotten the sense that this is something important to the field? And you literally can ask them that level of question. Ask them to read at that level. Because when you tell a person what level or what way do you want them to read, that will tell you the signaling, what feedback they're looking for. So guiding their feedback and literally guiding their cognitive processing can make a big impact in terms of what you get from them. So that's, I think I would really guide them. I call it, mentoring. Mentoring for what? If you ask me to be your general mentor, well, okay, what does that mean? If you ask me to help you with this, this, and this, I can do that. Same thing here. When you're looking for feedback, really be very explicit on what kind of feedback you're looking for. So that's all you have to do. It's easy, right? Trust me, I know it's not easy. And I have a hard time doing this on my own grants. I have to have other people on other things as well. So even though you learn the skill, you still, because the bottom line is, when you're reading something at the beginning, you already know the whole rest of the story. When a reviewer is reading something linearly, they don't know the rest of the story. And so your brain, I tell people, after you've written the sixth variation, the sixth version of the Ames page, your brain is useless from the standing of making an objective sense of how will this be read by someone the first time they read it. I can run into, if I've been working with someone on the Ames page for 4 months, my brain becomes useless to giving them feedback on it because I've seen it so much and I know what's coming. So it's, again, capturing the sense of people reading it, not knowing what's coming is what is replicating what a reviewer is doing. And different reviewers will be more or less patient, but I always describe readers of Ames pages actually very impatient people, and they want to get to the meat. They want to get to the, okay. And so when I talk about funnels are, Ames page come down like this. Funnels on significant pages comes down like this. So literally the lines of the funnel can be quite different. Okay.
Okay.
I have a question.
Oh, please.
Sure.
Is there time?
Oh, yes, please. Go.
Yep.
You mentioned acknowledging a controversy in the field and having strategies for how to address them appropriately. Can you discuss some of those strategies?
Yeah, and a lot depends on the nature of the, yeah, thanks, Rebecca. A lot of it depends on the nature of the controversy. From the one extreme where you have two camps and neither one will talk to each other, and a scientific meeting gets into a food fight invariably. That kind of a controversy, my advice is stay out of it. Quite honestly, as a junior investigator, enter those kind of controversies very, very cautiously, because as a junior person, you have no standing, and all you can do is end up with a lot of food, food from the food fight. So I mean, joking, but not. I would, as a junior investigator, I would be cautious about entering into a very polarized field, because as a junior person, it's like, well, what are you going to add to the field that the field hasn't already figured out? Now, if there are two different kind of current thinkings about something and people are still figuring it out, you're acknowledging currently there are two primary ways of looking at this, or primary streams of research, and now this one goes this way, this one goes this way. My goal is, we've discovered something new that could contribute and explain some of the differences that are being seen in the field. So how you address it really depends on the nature of the controversy and what role you're going to be playing and what role you're able to make. Now, if you've got some really new observation that really tends to tip the scales towards one of the two camps, you again have to be fairly cautious about this, as it's not proving this one, it's adding new light to the controversy, which right now is looking like it's more consistent with this line of discovery, and so therefore we need to follow it to see, does it really add more strength to this position? Because surely these people are going to know if they're wrong. Yeah, right. No, they don't want to know if they're wrong. But anyway, so again, you're adding to the field, in that regard. Does that help at all in terms of
Very
something you're
helpful.
facing, or?
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay.